Hi, my name's Martin Purnell, and welcome to Off-Grid Christianity, a weekly podcast for those who go or don't go to church and where we can meet and hear from those that have made their faith count. This podcast series is to encourage via conversation. And don't forget you can contact us as well by email, ogc@accessradio.biz. That's ogc@accessradio.biz, and biz is spelled B-I-Z. We've also got our website up and running as well, which is offgridchristianity.co.uk. So please enjoy today's guest, especially after you've hit the subscribe button, in case you haven't already done so. Many thanks. Our guest today, who is he? Well, in his spare time, he's a lecturer at the theological college. He has described his faith as being on a deconstruction and reconstruction journey. He also used to work for Worth Unlimited, where he was the chief executive officer for the Christian charity, which is dedicated to help young people be heard, valued, and help them grow. Our guest is also a senior associate at Economies, a community-based society in Birmingham whose mission is to grow local economies and contribute to social justice. Our guest has an MA in community organisation and advocacy, which has nothing to do with avocados apparently, and another MA in youth ministry and theological education. And let's not leave out his BA in history either. With all this knowledge, let's hope he likes people as well. So, what is ABCD approach? What does he mean by living intentionally for 21 years on a Birmingham estate? Why did he co-found a programme called Changemakers? What does he mean by deconstruction and reconstruction? What has he learned about his own faith? How difficult is it to be freelance, especially when helping churches and people? Why do this anyway? And what does social justice mean to our guest? And maybe we'll get some answers to at least a few of those questions as well, depending how we get on. It gives me great pleasure today to welcome to Off-Grid Christianity, Tim Evans. Tim, thank you so much for joining us today. I've mentioned Birmingham a couple of times, so exactly where are you today, good sir?
Martin, thanks for having us. Great to be with you. Yes, I'm in East Birmingham, so right on the edge of the city.
Before we get into the main frame of this, thank you for all those people that have been giving us great feedback regarding previous podcasts. One listener wrote in regarding the podcast with Dave Mann and said the podcast was brilliant, encouraging and challenging. She then asked God what she can offer regarding the loaves of fishes. And in our little chat beforehand, Tim, I mentioned the Dave Mann podcast. You know Dave Mann personally, so those comments there, especially loaves and fishes, what does that mean to you?
Interesting place to start. So that's a story actually that I use quite a lot when we talk about asset-based community development. So
brilliant.
I think it's a story about scarcity and abundance. When we think about the world and we think about needs that's in front of us, just like Jesus had 5,000, there would have been more than 5,000 because it's 5,000 men and there would have potentially been women and children there. The disciples go, we've got all this need in front of us. We can't meet this need. You need to send them somewhere like home where actually they can meet their need. And Jesus basically goes, tell me what you've got in your hand. Tell me what actually you have got. And they say, well, we've just got this boy. He's got these loaves and these fishes. And actually, in the economy of God, that is more than sufficient. But it's sufficient not just in the economy of God, but it's sufficient in terms of the generosity of people as they share together, actually. And generosity is a key community building value. Do you know what I mean? It's like encouraging generosity in our communities. And actually, when we discover generosity between us, we discover that we have more than we thought we had. It's actually a story that I really resonate with and that I actually use a lot.
Brilliant. Well, thank you to that listener for writing in.
Yeah, brilliant.
It just made me think there when you're talking about Jesus and the 5,000 plus. Could you imagine if he was doing that today? All of a sudden you get the health and safety officers coming through. Have you got a permit, please, to do this? Fingers on the buzzers, please, Tim. No conferring. Question number 1. If you could invite anybody from history, world history that is, for an evening meal, alive or dead, so that you could ask them questions, who would it be?
I suppose I'm going to pick an obvious one, actually. So I'm going to pick Martin Luther King.
Great answer.
And the reason I would pick Martin Luther King is I'd love to hear how he thought about hope. How he thought about whether things were ever going to change. What is it that propels you and keeps you going, even in the midst of all of that stuff? He would be one, I think, that I would love to pick his brains about his journey.
He's one of my heroes. That is a great answer. Question is, though, what would you cook him?
That's a very good question. I'm actually an appalling cook. I'm not sure how well fed he would get unless I could persuade my beautiful wife to help out with making sure Martin Luther King got what he needed.
Well, it's interesting because a previous guest recently said she couldn't cook at all, so she'd take her guest down to the local chippy. And I thought that was a great answer, fish and chips.
I mean, obviously, I'm in Birmingham, one of the curry capitals of the world.
Yep.
We've got some great local curry houses that we go to, so Maybe a chat around the table in the curry house would be the way that we would do it.
I love curries. Maybe we should do a curry night one night. That'd be really good. Question 2. Who is your favourite biblical character or favourite biblical story or favourite parable, please, Tim?
I've got a bit of an affinity for Jacob.
Okay.
I've got an affinity because I am an absolute wrestler with my faith, with God, with the world, with working out like what on earth does this stuff all mean and how do we do this stuff. And so I really resonate with somebody going, do you know what? I'm just not going to accept like some easy answers. I'm going to wrestle with it. And that story is painful because Jacob then walks with a limp. You know, sometimes when we're wrestling with God and wrestling with the world and wrestling with justice and all those things, sometimes we ended up having to walk with a limp because things kind of happen and hurt us. And so I really resonate with that kind of way of thinking about how to relate to God, actually. Like it fits my personality, actually. I'm a bit like that as we go. So Jacob, there you go. Jacob would be my character.
Thank you for saying that. I don't know if we're related because we've identified with each other on so many levels, even before starting this podcast. And I get exactly what you're saying there. I always thought I was thick, basically. And it wasn't until I became a training officer that I realised through going on a certain training course, I wasn't thick. It was just my learning style.
Yeah.
You've summed it up in one word, wrestling. So if someone says to me, blah, de, blah, de, blah, immediately I would think, well, really?
Yeah.
A lot of people would say, no, you're now questioning. You don't understand it. No, I'm asking a question here. So thank you. Jacob. I'm a Jacob. I'm a cream cracker. Question 3. If you were Prime Minister for the day and could change any law or impose a new law, what would it be?
This actually relates to the comment that you've just made, actually. So I've been a bit involved in politics. I was a councillor, for a little while, etc.
Oh, very good.
A bit involved in some politics, in Birmingham. It's an area of policy rather than a law. And if I couldn't be Prime Minister, the other job I would do if I was ever in government is I would be Education Secretary. Because I think
very good.
Education often just doesn't work for lots of young people that I've kind of worked with. The way that the system works, it works for some. If you're good in that system, you can go a long way in it. And, I was one of those people that went quite a long way in education. But for lots of young people, I think it doesn't really work. It makes them feel deficient. It makes them feel stupid. It makes them feel outside of the kind of boundaries. If you're not on this academic track to university, you're somehow not. And we've tried to do some things about it. But if I could do one thing politically, it would absolutely be to rethink the education system.
Perhaps also you can put into this format of yours when you change it that men and boys growing up need to know that at age 50, all of a sudden there's a major turning point in life because not only do you become extra grumpy, but you also become very, very pedantic. One of the things that really gets my goat, and this applies to you now as Education Secretary, well, Prime Minister telling the Education Secretary what to do, is that we kick out, please, all the Americanisms that are coming in. And what I mean by that, the word apologise, it hasn't got a Z in it, it's got an S in it.
Yeah.
Colour is spelt with a U in it, not just an O. Thank you.
Yes. I will take that on board. When I'm Prime Minister, you can be my special advisor.
Thank you.
You can put that into the policy mix for us. That's great.
I actually don't want you to take it on board. I want you to do something about it. That's different.
I think the odds of me becoming Prime Minister are extremely long, so I may not be able to help you.
Have you got a frivolous answer, by the way?
Yes, I would ban Christmas songs being played in shops until the 1st of December. I get really irritated when you walk into a shop in October and they're already playing Christmas tunes. So they would be banned.
Yes.
I invite others to come and join my campaign to ban Christmas music in shops until the 1st of December.
Banning Christmas songs, you might probably get more votes for that than sorting out world poverty. Question 4. Outside of family events, what has been your most enjoyable day out so far, please, Tim?
10 years ago, I did the mad thing of cycling from Land's End to John O'Groats. So cycling from one end of the country to the other. I'm quite into cycling.
Yeah, but that's all uphill. You should have done it the other way.
Yeah. No, because the prevailing wind is southwesterly in this country, so you want to go that way. So that's the way to go.
Is that true?
Yes. So you're more likely to have the wind behind you if you go from Land's End to John O'Groats. If you go the opposite way, the prevailing wind is literally in your face. So you're literally kind of cycling into it. So I did that literally 10 years ago.
Wow.
This September coming up. My favourite day of that trip was we climbed out of Kendal, in the Lake District, which was quite a big climb kind of out.
Yeah.
It happened to be my birthday, my 45th birthday. And they hired a little scout hutty type thing on the top and got me a cake and sang happy birthday, etc. So I got my birthday having climbed out Kendal halfway through Land's End to John O'Groats, kind of on a beautiful sunny day in the Lake District. And it was a really brilliant kind of experience. So there's my favourite day out for you.
Oh, that's wonderful. Was that a surprise as well?
Exactly. I didn't know the birthday bit was coming up. To be honest, I was just focused on getting up this rather steep climb,
Wow.
like out of Kendal. So that was the only thing I was really worried about at the time. I was just relieved to be at the top. So the bonus of a kind of little birthday treat was extra to that effort.
So how many of you cycled on it then?
So I just went with one friend, but we went on an organised kind of event, and so we met lots of other people, and so there's been some friendships that have been built kind of from that. In fact, actually, week after next, I'm cycling in Scotland, doing something called the North Coast 500, starting from Inverness and kind of working our way around the coast, and then back to Inverness as a reunion ride with some of the people that we met, like on the Land's End to John O'Groats trip. So it's really nice. So I'm looking forward to
wonderful.
kind of reconnecting with some people I've not seen, do you know what I mean, for a little while. So yeah.
My favourite rhythm and blues band, the guitarist, did something similar about 10 years ago as well, cycling up to John O'Groats. Something I wouldn't do. I'd drive up.
It is a bit of a mad thing to do, to be honest, but it was great.
That's your most enjoyable day out. What's been your most embarrassing moment to date, please, Tim?
My most embarrassing moment. I'm even laughing just even thinking about it. I only did one term, but I was a counsellor, not as in tell me your problems, but counsellor as in elected politics, for 4 years. Where I live, there's a small but significant population that have come to this country from Nigeria. And so they decided that what they wanted to do was celebrate Nigerian Independence Day, in the community. And so being the local councillor, they kind of asked me to speak at it. So suit and tie, etc. But they also decided they wanted a bit of a cultural show. And I am in our community theatre group. We put on pantomimes and stuff every year. So what I ended up doing, and honestly, I cringe even thinking about it, is I gave this speech saying how wonderful it was that they were in our community and congratulating them on Nigerian Independence Day, etc. And then I went to the back and got changed and came back out as a pink lady because they wanted us to do Grease Lightning as a kind of medley, as a kind of cultural kind of event and stuff. Honestly, it was the most surreal, embarrassing moment of that kind of juxtaposition of suited and booted, official person, councillor, etc., to we're going to do the Grease Lightning medley for them, which I think they were a bit bemused by, to be honest. I think they hadn't quite known what they'd let themselves come in for. So definitely a moment in our community that I've not really kind of lived down yet, I think.
I am desperately trying to get my limited brain cells to work out what the connection is.
None.
None at all.
No, but it was just, the pink lady thing would have been embarrassing in itself, but it was the fact that I'd just done this kind of whole official thing on behalf of the city of Birmingham, congratulated them, etc. And then kind of gone out, got changed and come out completely differently. So yes, it was a very embarrassing moment that I'm hoping there's no videos of. So don't go searching for it in YouTube and stuff, because I'm hoping nobody videoed it.
That's almost as surreal as when I was asked about 20, 30 years ago now to host whatever it was, an evening at a church where they were going to do music events and discuss stuff. And then a couple of my colleagues from the radio stations on at the end, they came out, and whilst someone was reading, they're hitting this person with a banana. Hello, Keith, if you're listening, let me know. I still can't get my head round what that was about. Almost the same sort of thing. They knew what it meant. I hadn't got a clue. Thank you so much for those answers, Tim. It doesn't sound to me as if you've got a Birmingham accent. So how come you're up in Birmingham then? Tell us more.
The accent is from Essex. So I spent part of my kind of mid to late teenage years living just outside Chelmsford. So that's where the accent kind of comes from. But I was born in Devon, then moved to follow my dad's job, kind of then lived in Cobham in Surrey. We were talking before the podcast about football teams. It's why I'm a Fulham supporter, because I lived in Cobham. At that age when, you instead of just supporting the team that's doing really well, which at that point was Liverpool, you kind of start thinking I need to support a local club. And so West London clubs became the clubs that I was thinking of. Then we moved to Essex when I was about 14 or so. So what's now the start of year 10. So that's where the accent comes from. Went to university at Swansea, went and started doing youth work in Cambridge at the YMCA in Cambridge. So I lived in Cambridge for 5 or 6 years, where I got married. And then I moved to Birmingham for work in 1998, and then moved in 1999 from Cambridge to Birmingham, which our friends in Cambridge thought we were mad because there's this perception of Birmingham as dirty, smelly, horrible place. But actually it's beautiful and wonderful, actually. It's a great place. So then I've lived in Birmingham now for 26 years, I think it is now.
I did mention at the very beginning that you haven't involved anyway with a community benefit society called Economy, and social justice is another word that I mentioned that's part of their brief. It's important to you. So tell me, what does social justice mean to you and why get so involved in it?
That's a big question, I think, because it's a term that gets hijacked like a little bit.
No,
I
exactly.
think sometimes, and so I think it's actually become a much more contentious thing, and faith circles can be particularly contentious, like to think about. To me, justice is about people having the things that they need in order to live a good life. You know, Jesus says, "I come to give life and life in all its abundance," and that means sharing resources, sharing relationships, people having the same kind of opportunities in life, not having those kind of barriers kind of put in their way, not getting on in life simply because you've come from a certain kind of privileged position, whether that's kind of where you're born or your class or whatever it might be, that actually so often our society kind of enables people from certain kind of contexts to get on and other contexts kind of not to get on. So for me, it's about fairness, equality, like etc. And the fundamental sort of theological thing for me is two things. One is every human being is made in the image of God. So every human being is intrinsically valuable. As soon as you lose that, as soon as you say, well, some people are slightly more important than others, or more human than others, or more deserving than others, I think you are marring like the idea that everybody's created in the image of God. And then actually the thing I'm kind of talk a lot about is this idea of shalom, God's shalom. And so actually, if you go back to the creation story, however you understand that, you know, we are made to be in right relationship with God, right relationship with each other, right relationship like with place and planet. And the fall story, however you interpret that, is a dislocation of all of those things. So injustice comes from our dislocation. It comes from our disconnection, from a sense of mutual, from being in right relationship with God, but also our mutual obligations to each other and our mutual obligations to steward and look after and care for the place and the planet that we're on. For me, injustice then stems like from all of that, where there's hatred, bitterness, division, societies that are created where some people get on and some people don't. Do you know what I mean? Like, etc. For me, that's the fundamental problem. And so a lot of what I do is around kind of community building kind of work, whether that's socially, economically, etc., is be trying to kind of think about that shalom kind of approach to the world. How can we play our part in enabling people to experience right relationships with God, with each other, and with the planet? And if we lived harmoniously in those ways, I mean, maybe society would be better.
Yeah, it's a big word if, though, isn't it?
Yes.
As soon as you said, you know, we're made in the image of God, I was about to shout out, even pink ladies.
Yes, exactly. Yeah, absolutely. But it's true, though. I mean, I know the joke is about the pink ladies, but actually,
Yeah.
you know, think of your most awkward family member, or think of your most difficult person, like in your community, or maybe someone at work that you don't get on that well with. They are made in the image of God. Like, however their behaviors and stuff like might be difficult, if you stop treating them as intrinsically valuable, and that's where the challenge comes. We can talk about injustice as a kind of big thing. It's also how we treat the people around us, like how we see people, how we value people. And that's really hard. Like, it's really hard when, you know, like I say, perhaps we don't get on with somebody or somebody's not treating us very well, like, etc. It's hard to continue to say, this is someone who is still created like in God's image and bears the image of their maker. You know, that's a tough thing sometimes to live out, like in life.
Well, let's take this seriously, but use the fact that you were a pink lady on stage.
So even pink ladies are deserving of it. Yeah.
Yeah, but let's use it as the analogy. But there could have been some people in the crowd watching it saying, this is disgusting, it's horrible, it's not part of what we're here for, and make a complaint about it. In a social justice world, is there a possibility whereby actually, no, you do have to have parameters, you do have to have green lines, whereby if you cross a green line, we have to work out some form of punishment or whatever you want to call it. So where does that fit in?
So that's a really, really interesting, I think that's a really, really interesting question. We might come on to it later, actually, but I was reflecting on the Desmond Tutu's kind of Truth and Reconciliation kind of commission, like that idea that what needs to happen in order for those kind of relationships like to be repaired, what does that look like? And it can't just be a fluffy kind of, well, we love people and so it's okay, like type approach to things, I think. Again, we might come on to it a bit later, but one of my deconstruction, reconstruction like pieces of thinking is about what do we understand judgment to be. I became a Christian into a world where judgment was thought of largely in a particular way. The tradition that I kind of became a Christian into largely thought of it in a particular way. And I think I've had to kind of rethink that a little bit, like as I've gone on and work out actually what does like reconciliation like look like? What does it mean actually to deal with those things? And actually, that's not easy to deal with, but actually to think that stuff kind of out like a little bit. I think that's been part of my kind of journey actually, is to think about that. And so truth telling, for example, is an important thing, like owning your own behaviors. That's a thing. Helping other people do the same. What do you do when someone doesn't respond to that? There's all kinds of trickiness, I think, like you say, in people's lives where that's not easy. So I'm not kind of trying to paint a kind of simplistic kind of picture, because the world is messy and complex. I'm 54 now. I've kind of begun to learn that about the world, that it's messy and complex. But there are some fundamentals, I think, kind of underneath it, that if you lose your moorings on those underpinnings, you've then got nowhere to go to kind of make good judgments about how to kind of respond. And that can be in all kinds of ways. It could be, like, say, like in your family or in your work or whatever. But it could be, for example, how do you see penal policy? Do you know what I mean? For example, like, how do you see that? I mean, it's interesting that, the current government have got a guy called Lord Timpson in, who's got a kind of different approach to how you might think about rehabilitation of prisoners, for example, than perhaps the kind of trend that we've been on for a long time about crime and punishments, for example. So, like, this stuff is important, I think, because it gives you a mooring to kind of explore how to act in the world.
The other issue that we have, let's throw this in now into our pink lady debate, is that because you become a Christian, immediately some people think, right, you're on now the same level as everybody else. But actually all you've done is just accept Jesus Christ as your saviour. That's all you've actually done. There's now so much more that you have to learn about your faith. What does God actually want you to do? What does he not want you to do? What does he want you to give up? Are you prepared to give up so many things so you can actually be the person God wants you to be? So with that in mind, let's look, if that's okay then, please, at deconstruction and reconstruction for your faith and what you had to go through. And perhaps at the end we can then build it back up so we can see more about what social justice means to you as a result of what you've gone through. So tell us all about it then, please, Tim. What happened?
So my little story was, my parents were both churchgoers in different ways, but actually I wouldn't describe us as a kind of faith kind of family. My only memory of going to church was St. George's Day parades, like in the Scouts when I was a kid. So when I became a Christian at university, I didn't really have any other point of reference other than the kind of fairly evangelical, charismatic kind of tradition, if you like, that I kind of joined. And I had what I consider to be an authentic conversion-like experience. So that was part of my kind of story. So then I was probably very annoying to everybody at university because I was trying to convert the whole world. I was very passionate about it. I thought I discovered the keys to the universe. And it was really meaningful, like, to me.
Yeah.
But you can go a bit overboard sometimes with that stuff, and a bit of lack of humility. You can get a bit of hubris, like, in the process. Do you know what I mean? Like, as you go, you kind of, the thing you just said, actually, you don't really kind of realise how much more you've got to kind of learn and grow in and stuff. So I'm speaking for myself, I'm not speaking for other people. Anyway, I worked for a YMCA for a few years, and then I went to join a more missionary evangelical kind of organisation, which is actually why I moved to Birmingham. So I kind of joined that organisation. And basically, I found myself kind of really questioning some of the fundamentals, if you like, of what that organisation kind of really believed and why it was doing mission and what it was for. And I don't want to name the organisation because it was me that moved away from the organisation, not that the organisation was wrong or whatever in the first. So I'm not claiming that. So I want to be careful about how I express that. So the point was, there were some fundamental things that I really started to really think about. I hope this doesn't offend any of your listeners, but I started asking questions like, what is the Bible? Like, what it actually is it? I started questioning hell. I started thinking about this whole notion that I've been given about why did Jesus die and penal substitutionary atonement, like, etc. So I am a kind of big to little, what I describe as a big to little thinker. Like, so I have to kind of grasp the kind of bigger stuff, and then I can work out what that means for the way that I live, the things I do, like what's important to me. We'll come back to the social justice question, actually. The other part of it for me was that I was working with, really quite traumatized young people. Young people who had really difficult kind of lives, really difficult stuff kind of going on with them and stuff. And so kind of some of the answers, if you like, that I felt that kind of expression of faith was giving kind of wasn't really cutting it, like with the challenges and difficulties of these young people's lives. I was growing an understanding about trauma, attachment, all of those, some of the psychology stuff, even some of the neurology stuff and biological stuff and physiological stuff, like how your body kind of reacts to trauma and difficulty and challenge. So I was wrestling with all of that stuff, actually. So I left that organisation quite painfully. I didn't leave it badly in terms of the organisation, at least I hope they don't think that I did. But I just wasn't sure where I was at. I just wasn't sure about what I thought, actually. Like, I felt like this whole identity I'd had for about 10 years had kind of unwound on me, and I wasn't quite sure where I was. And I was kind of like, do I even believe in God anymore? Like, what was that? So it was really, when I say painful, I want to be careful because I've worked with people who've had really abusive lives. And so I want to be careful when I say painful that I've got that in perspective. But it was kind of emotionally painful, like to do. And I even described myself as an agnostic for a little bit of time because I really wasn't kind of like sure of it. And then the thing that actually helped me a lot was some people that I knew had set up something called a peace church, like in Birmingham, and they did it like a meal every month. And you sit around the meal table and you kind of explore some of these kind of where you're at with your faith journey, what that looked like, what you were thinking about reflecting on. Sometimes they got people in to kind of help us explore like some of those things. And so I finally felt that it was a space and a place where I could begin to kind of unpick some of those things and think about them. And actually, what I discovered was that the Christian tradition is much broader and richer than the tradition that I just kind of become a Christian into. So it wasn't about kind of saying that tradition's all wrong, because I wasn't saying, even in my kind of struggles, I wasn't saying that. But I begun to discover there were some different perspectives and different ways of seeing things. And that stuff had been true all through the history of the Christian church, really. And so, I remember one significant moment actually where, here's your Jacob for you, actually, the wrestling kind of thing that we talked about earlier.
Yeah.
Is I went, right, okay, fundamental thing I need to think about first is, do I still believe there is such a thing as God? Like, do I believe that? Forget the kind of Christian doctrine stuff for the moment. Do I think that? And I had this, I remember this moment. I had this moment where I kind of dreamt that or imagined that I was standing on the edge of a cliff, and that throwing myself off the cliff was to throw myself into unbelief. And I remember thinking, I've got to have the courage to do that if I really don't feel, that this God thing is something that I still can go with. And I remember thinking, I've got to have the guts to do that. I can't just cling on to it because it's given me a sense of identity and purpose and meaning and all the things that it had given me. Because if, in inverted commas, if it's not true, it's not true. And I remember, like, deep in my gut, if you like, I was like, no, I absolutely do believe there's God. I can't describe it. It was such a kind of gut thing. It wasn't just a belief thing. It wasn't just a feeling thing. It was something deep within me that was like, I absolutely believe there is God. And once I've done that, I can think about where I'm at now. I can begin to kind of rethink things. I did a theology master's partly to help me think about it. I carried on this Peace Church stuff. I began to read a bit more. I began to talk to people. I'd always been someone who'd gone to Greenbelt Festival, so I found that a really helpful place to think about it. So I began to kind of do what you might describe as the reconstruction journey. Actually, I heard a lady called Paula Gooder, who's a British canon theologian at St Paul's Cathedral, talk about the Psalms, and she describes it as the Psalms in three, like orientation, disorientation, reorientation. If you look at the Psalms, they're kind of in those three blocks. And I actually began to find that more helpful language, that what had happened to me is I'd orientated myself around Jesus, and that was meaningful and purposeful and true for me, like at university and for a period of time afterwards. But then I got disorientated, like I got kind of put in a bit of a spin, and that disorientation was disorientating. And that's how I felt, actually. I felt really disorientated, not stable, not in a good place, like, etc. I felt like things were moving. And then actually what I've begun to do was reorientate myself. Okay, it might be different to where I was before, but I've begun to reorientate like myself. And I think that probably describes my kind of journey. I'm still learning, I'm still wrestling, etc. But I feel like I've reorientated myself.
Anybody that says that they haven't been through a process of questioning whether God exists, maybe it's too much to say, well, you're a liar. But It's nearly there. I think most people have to do it. And I'll put my hands up. I was doing it last night. So
yeah, absolutely. Yeah.
That's where I am. I actually remember in my final days before having to give up work to look after a very sick wife and a little baby boy who was 18 months old. And I haven't seen this chap since. And he said to me, his journey of faith is a bit like, he said, those old films we used to see, silent movies, where you'd see like the cowboy running along the railway track because the baddies were after him. And eventually he gets to the cliff edge where all of a sudden the railway track stops and looks down. There's like a 300-foot cliff jump. Will he survive it? And he said, it's a bit like the faith, whereby actually, what do you do? Do you go back and get shot by the baddies? What do you do? And he said, and all of a sudden, your faith will be like, you look ahead, and in midair, 2 yards away, is all of a sudden a railway sleeper.
Yeah.
Then what do you do? Do you get onto it, or do you stay and get shot, or do you jump? And he said, you have to step out over that 300-foot gorge onto that railway sleeper. And then when you're there, God will then provide the next one and the next one. And I thought, okay, sort of get the idea where you're saying on this. I am right to give up work and look after the two people in my life. And that has been my process ever since. And that was 22 years ago. And I'm still here. A lot of the time, reluctantly still here.
Yeah.
And that's my issue, which I'm working through. But that's what you've been through deconstruction and reconstruction. With that in mind then, and with what I've shared, where's your faith currently?
So first of all, thank you for sharing that. That's really moving.
Was it?
It is, because I think these stuff are things. And actually, I will come on to the question you asked. But it reminds me that one of the things I help develop and lead this program called Change Makers, and we go to a place called Holy Island at the end of the program each time. If you haven't been, go. It's an amazing place. It's what's called a thin place if you're into your Celtic spirituality. But one of the things is you can walk, when the tide's out, you can walk barefoot across the bottom of the North Sea from the mainland to the islands, about 2.5, 3 mile kind of walk. There's pilgrims posts like along the way. So I've done it lots of times in different weathers. And the one that reminds me of what you were describing was, I remember once doing it in kind of quite deep fog or deep mist. And you literally could only just about see the next post as you walked. And so it's actually very disorientating.
Yeah.
You can't see where you're going. You can't see where you've come from. The sea is somewhere to your right. Land is somewhere to your left. It's a very disorientating kind of experience. And all you can do is see the next pole just about and walk to that. And then after that, the next one. And after that, the next one. And I do think sometimes people I know that are going through really difficult stuff, that's probably the way that they would describe it, is sometimes like you've just got to think about what the next kind of step like is. And the other thing about that journey is, although you're doing your journey, you are walking with other people. And I think that's the other important part of that is actually, you can't do life without mates. You can't do life without friends. Like, you can't do life on your own. That's not how we're meant to be. And yes, we need God, but we also need like each other. And sometimes when people are in that situation where they can only take one step like in front of the other, you have to do the steps kind of with them. One of my favorite stories, biblical stories, is the road to Emmaus. This idea that Jesus journeys with us, but we don't always recognize him. Like, he's there, but we don't always recognize him. I think for so many people of faith and non-faith, actually, like this kind of opening ourselves up to the possibility that maybe Jesus does walk with us, we just don't recognize him. Like, I really resonate with that. Where my faith would be at now, actually, is I think I feel fairly steady, the right word. I'm trying to find the right phraseology to describe myself.
Yeah, steady is a good word.
Yeah, I think so. I'm always curious and always wrestling. So I'll never be somebody who doesn't do that. That's in my DNA and it's in my personality. It's just who I am in life, actually. But I think I feel like I've got a bit of a kind of framework of understanding, I think, of my faith that kind of holds me kind of in that place where actually I feel like I can make some sense of it without having to make sense of everything. Actually, one of the things actually that's been part of my journey is you don't have to know everything. Some of this stuff is mysterious. Like, some of this stuff is just taking a step in front of the other, just trusting that God is not just with me, but with the world, actually. And I think the thing that's really helped me is this idea that God is ultimately seeking to renew the whole of creation, actually. I think that's the thing that's kind of shaped and shaped my thinking and stuff. And so I kind of live my life kind of going, what is my part in the renewing of all things? Like, what is that? It's not my job to fix it all. It's not my job to make it all right. Ultimately, that will be eschatology. I mean, ultimately, that will be what God will do. But it is my job to play my part in that, to join in with whatever God is up to, like in the world, and just go with that and just join in with that. And I think that God is a God of justice, going back to a bit of our earlier conversation. I think that God is a God like who calls us to care for those who find themselves on the edges of things and on the margins, do you know what I mean, of things. I think God asks us to kind of work for a world where the meek shall inherit the earth. Blessed will be the peacemakers, etc. If God asks us for that kind of world, then my work is not to work it all out, but to go, how can I play my bit in all of that? And I think that motivates me enormously, that kind of sense of God. So I don't have it all sorted. I'm sure that lots of your listeners will probably critique lots of my theology that I've just kind of thrown around the place, but it's that kind of hope of the renewal of all things, I think, and that resurrection means resurrection of everything, that I think is the thing that kind of keeps me on the go.
Well, I think we've lost a lot of listeners in the past who've had a checklist whereby they come across a podcast and think, if this person does all these questions, then I'm going to be listening to future podcasts.
Yeah.
And a couple of years ago, one particular podcast, I lost, 50, 60% of my audience straight away.
Really?
Yeah, oh, yeah. And do you know what? That person, I'd have him back straight away. That's what you get, unfortunately. We have this like checklist theology. And providing they say the right things, then I'm with him. But as soon as he says one thing, he's off.
It's the famous Tony Campolo quote where he stood up in a church and he said, tonight, I can't remember how hundreds of thousands of children will die like a preventable malnutrition and illness, and you don't give a and you are now more offended by the fact I've used the word than you are about all these children that are going to die. I mean, he was a very provocative guy, Tony Campolo, but it was that point of like, sometimes we miss what I think sometimes we can with that checklist mode, miss it actually what the heartbeat of God is. What's the heartbeat of God for the world? Like, God so loved the world. God's heart is for the world. And so our heart should be for the world.
And congratulations, because I'll be using the bleep button.
Yes, exactly. Yes. So apologies.
No, it's fine. Because actually, if you listen to the Tony Campolo special that we did to commemorate the fact that he died recently, we actually go back to the very start of where that story came from. And good old Steve, he was the one that actually, together with Peter, brought him over to Spring Harvest for the first time. And Tony Campolo wanted to share this story. And Steve said, no, go for it. But it wasn't that word. It was another word. But anyway, the premise is exactly the same.
It's the same, yeah.
We need another Tony Campolo. No two ways about it, as far as I'm concerned.
Yeah, absolutely.
Hopefully then we've got listeners here who are going what I've gone through and going what you've gone through and going through. And I do love the thing about, in this case, walking to Farne Island, especially as there's a pub on there as well, apparently. There's a couple of good pubs, I've been told.
Yeah, 3 of them, yes.
So you've been told.
I know.
What made you realise when you were in your deepest, darkest moments that, okay, God, you do exist then?
I think it was that moment that I described of kind of cliff stuff. I think it was just a deep kind of guts kind of thing. And actually, I mean, without boring your listeners too much with this stuff, and you may know this better than I do, in neurological kind of terms, that when you get that gut feeling, that gut instinct, that's the oldest bit of your brain telling you something really important. But it's the bit of your brain that doesn't have language. It's called your limbic brain.
Oh, really?
So it's the bit of your brain that doesn't have language. So basically, if you think about it, and again, I don't want to offend your listeners about kind of evolution and what we think about evolution and all that kind of stuff. But if you kind of go with the thought that back in the day, you saw a bear and your brain doesn't go, oh, it's a bear. How big is the bear? How fast can the bear run? You don't do that. Your brain literally goes, bear, run.
Yes.
Like, do you know what I mean? Like, you're going to die if you don't. Then your frontal cortex is the newer part of your brain, which is the logical bit of your brain. And so actually what we often do is we engage our kind of logical, if you like, bit of our brain and ignore the kind of instinctive bit of our brain, but it doesn't have language. So when you say something doesn't feel right,
yes,
that's the bit of your brain. Your brain is going, there's something not right here, but I can't give you words to describe it. But there's something in you that goes, that's not right. And I think I was paying attention to when I talk about that idea of reconnecting with, no, do you know what? I really think there is a God. However that's understood, however religions have decided to construct that, etc., 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 there is something outside of ourselves. And I think it was in that deep gut kind of thing. And I think that kind of gut instinct was the thing that is the only thing I can point to. Like, if your listeners want kind of rational arguments for the existence of God, then I'm not the best person to kind of do that. But it definitely was a deep sense of that. And I think when you say, where's your faith at now? I think I have that kind of actually very deep in the chaos of life and the trauma of life and the hurt of life.
Yeah.
I think I have a very deep trust in what we might describe like as God. And I can't describe quite where that comes from other than it's very deep within me.
It's in your Noah.
Yeah.
As they say over here.
Yes.
It's in your Noah.
Yes. I would say to people, like, pay attention to that part of yourself, like pay attention to that kind of deep guts, kind of instinctive, allow that instinct to kind of tell you something.
Yeah. You should have listened to your gut thinking that the pink lady isn't going to work, but you still...
Yes, well, that's true. If I'm honest, it was one of those moments where I did actually know how this was going to play out and that it wasn't going to play out well. So even then, what you said is true, actually.
And if anyone's got footage of it, please send it to me, please. Obviously, not for blackmail purposes at all.
Yes, exactly, yes. Please don't.
Brilliant. But this is important, though, and I'd like to major on this still, if that's all right, Tim. I think it's brilliant we can have these kind of conversations just for me to learn as well. That's the thing. You've still pursued a case of social justice. And with all the thoughts of what God wants, and you've brought in, obviously, the fact that you've been to theology college as well, so you have a better understanding of the Bible than most, but you've also been able to put it into your brain cells and work out what it means to you. Surely then, on the one hand, you want to help people out, especially youngsters, so that they don't lose the rest of their life ahead. You can put them back on that single railway track as to where God wants them. When people say to you, well, as a Christian then, what are the parameters? Should we have rules and regulations? What do you think?
The passage I would go back to, if I can start with that, would be when Jesus talks about the Sabbath and talks about, was man made for the Sabbath or the Sabbath made for man? That idea that God creates a kind of rhythm of life and a way of being that is supposed to kind of enhance our lives together. So that's the starting point, really. I think one of the things that Jesus does is a lot of the time is the things he challenges are the things where powerful people get to exclude other people from what Jesus describes as the kingdom of God. So in that sense, Jesus is he kind of breaks those things, but he also kind of helps people see the purposefulness of them. When he says, go and show yourself to the priest, when he heals somebody, is because the priest is the gatekeeper back into mainstream society. And so he's like, go and show yourself to the priest, because the priest will have to reconnect you back into mainstream society because of that. So to me, what Jesus is constantly trying to do is to do things that are liberative for people, like that free people. Like, I think my overarching kind of theological thinking is that the whole of creation is held in bondage, that kind of idea, and that Jesus comes to kind of unbind us. And so when you say the guardrails or the rules, etc., for me, it's about just being free to do whatever you want isn't what the economy of God is about, but just having powerful people who kind of draw the lines really tightly also isn't like what the economy of God is about. I think it's about community, that like, how can we do community together that enriches our lives together, that helps us experience the compassion, the love, the generosity of the kingdom of God together. And so my guardrails would be values rather than rules, actually. Like, what does Jesus talk about in terms of love one another? Right, okay, well, to what extent was that thing that we did, or the way we talk, or the way we express something, or how we work with people, to what extent was that loving? Did that person experience it as loving? Now, loving can be a disciplinary thing. Like, loving, if I thought about my kids, for example, like, it's not like I let them get away with blue murder. You know what I mean? They can't just do anything. But what they experience, hopefully, is that everything I do is because I love them and I care for them and I want the best for them. And so the guardrails, as you put it, like, are there to help us to be the best that we, that we can be. As you can tell, I'm slightly resistant to rules-based religion because I think that has done so much harm in the world. Because who gets to set the rules?
Yeah.
It's actually powerful people who think they're anointed by God, to create the rules that actually keep their position kind of where it should be, and everyone else somewhere different. So a good story, prodigal son. We always talk about the son that went away and come back, but sometimes we don't talk about the son that stayed. The son that stayed obeyed the rules, right? He was the rule keeper. He was like, how dare you let this other son who's gone off and mucked everything up, he's not kept the rules. What are you doing? Like, why are you letting him back in? Why are you throwing parties for him? If we don't understand that change happens when we grasp the outrageous grace of God, the danger is what you end up with is rules-based religion, where people sort of do the right thing but don't actually experience the joy of the kingdom of God, don't experience the joy of grace, love, care, compassion, joy, forgiveness, all of those kind of things. So I'm a little bit suspicious of the rules stuff because the risk is that it excludes people. And actually, God is not in the position of excluding people.
But just to clarify this, you do have to have rules, but it's how they were made and why they were made.
Yes, if you drive your car and you completely disobey the rules of the road, and everybody does it, people get killed. That's the point. So Jesus talks all the time about what's the fruit of something, what's the outworking of something. And so actually you would say, well, of course we need to have rules for the road because we need to order our lives together in order that actually we can be as safe as possible whilst transporting ourselves, kind of around the place. And so we all buy into the rules, but they're not arbitrary rules. They're not kind of somebody just making something up. They're supposed to be rules where people go, it makes sense to have a stop sign there because otherwise you would have this, or the traffic lights to be here and, when they're red, you should stop because of this, that, or the other. Like, that's the point, isn't it? Like, rules are not there for their own purpose. And I think sometimes in religions, sometimes we can give the perspective at least that the rules are sort of arbitrary. They're kind of made up just to stop us having fun, or just to stop stuff, or just to keep powerful people in positions, rather than going, oh, I can see the purpose of the rules. I can see why there's some boundaries for that.
Yes.
St. Paul talks about this idea that we've all got freedom, but not all freedom is, do you know what I mean, is good for us kind of idea. I've been married for a few years, and, if I just did what the hell I wanted, it would then make my wife's life miserable. Do you know what I mean? Because it wouldn't be a reciprocal, like, how do we do life together type of thing. So, but I still would come back to the purposefulness of things. Like, they're not there for their own reason. They are there because, like, it gives us a sense of how to be together in life. And there are real contentious issues in the church, are there not? Where we're wrestling with those things. Like, has God set the rules about who sex is for and who it's not for example, or who marriage is for and who marriage is not for? I mean, that's really contentious in the church as we are speaking. And some people, therefore, are not experience the rules in a particular kind of way. And then you have to go, okay, well, what's that? What's going on there then? Like, what does those rules mean? Do we understand why those boundaries, do you know what I mean, are in place?
It's like a pendulum, isn't it? On the far left-hand side, you've got, I have to obey every single rule. And on the far right-hand side of the pendulum, going to the other side of it, it's like, well, actually, it's all about looking further than that. And then the pendulum will come down to the middle, and it's making sure that surely we can get a blend of both, whereby we can see it's not just about obeying the rules, it's why we're obeying it. It's about the love that you're talking about. It's the compassion. It's trying to help the people so that they don't fall away. They don't go, for instance, I've had enough of my life, and they might do something to themselves, or they might do something to others, of which there are rules for that.
Yeah.
We don't want that. We want to keep them going on that little pathway, and hopefully they'll find God out of it, because we're showing compassion, we're showing love, which is what true Christianity is about.
Yeah, so I think that's a really interesting point. So Steve Chalk, so Oasis have started this secure school kind of mode thing. So young people who have done things they shouldn't have done, or really struggling with life and need to be, for their own safety and the safety of others, kept away from other people. But Steve's point, which I completely agree with, is if you then continue just the punishment mode of that, you don't get to do rehabilitation, healing, etc. And I think, you need to get him on to talk more specifically about it. But I like his thinking.
I'm trying, if you know him.
Because I really like it. So, Steve, if you're listening, get on this podcast.
I do know there'll be people saying, why are you having Steve Chalk on? Because this is what he's done. This is what he said in the past 10, 15 years. You shouldn't be having him on there. And immediately, you're going to lose more audience.
Yes, exactly. Yes. I mean, I think there's a big debate, isn't there? I mean, lots of people think in terms of orthodoxy. I tend to think more in orthopraxis terms, like what's orthodox acting in the world, like acting and reflecting in the world. So in my world, and I'm not claiming to be right, by the way. No. So if you've got listeners who are now getting very annoyed with this, I'm not claiming to be right. I'm just saying that I spend more of my time thinking, how do I act authentically in the way of Jesus in this situation or in the world? What does that look like? Rather than going, I'm going to get really hooked up on what form of atonement I believe in, or what this. I mean, I think those things are important because they express something of how we see God. But to be honest, the world's burning. We have so much that is not right with the world. We have hatred and division and war. We've got a climate emergency. We've got people whose lives are difficult. There's too much, I think, to kind of do something about. And then for Christians, I think, to think about how do we act in an orthodox way? How do we act in an orthodox way as we look at the world, the issues around us, the issues in our neighborhood, the issues in the wider world? Like, what does that look like? And one of the things I really like about Steve is I feel like he acts that way. He kind of tries to do things in a way that are orthopraxis rather than just orthodoxy. And I just think that's the way I think about things. Like, what does it mean to follow Jesus today? Like, what does it mean to show up well in the world today? How do I show up in a way that is compassionate, loving, caring, and seeks to bring about some form of change or transformation that makes the world a little bit, even if it's tiny, a little bit more like the kingdom of God?
But there'll be people saying, yes, but you're a pink lady. And they'll miss the point.
Yes.
They'll miss the point of what you're saying.
Yes. I'm not sure I showed up well in that moment. So, yeah, yes. Do you know what? You're making me think of, I'm gonna write a blog, the theology of pink ladies. Like, I think that's a blog that needs to come out.
Yes. Because there's a hidden agenda here, or maybe not.
Yeah.
But it's amazing what you can use with it. Yeah, I'm glad we've got to this subject, because it's now showing exactly what your modus operandi is, as to why you're out there in the real world trying to help the youth of today be heard, valued, and help them grow. And we said right at the front end about the loaves and fishes. And your loaves and fishes happens to be, I think, having never met you before, that you've got an amazing brain cell or two. You know what you've been through, how to be deconstructed, how to be reconstructed, to get an understanding of what Jesus wants. You understand the difference between orthodoxy and the other word that I've forgotten that you used that was
Orthopraxis.
Orthopraxis, thank you, which has nothing to do with dentistry, apparently. Yeah, I'll let you sing that. Orthodontistry, it was orthodox. And you're going out there to say, well, this is what I can do as part of the issue to keep people on a nice, straight and narrow line so that maybe one day they will find Jesus and all this. Maybe they won't. But hey, you can benefit in the community, in the society. And I think in the remaining few minutes, if that's all right, before we get to the final question, What have you seen by being out there in the community with all your degrees, with all your life to date, what you're seeing out there in the community, your immediate community, that's encouraging you and thinking, actually, this isn't too bad, we can do better?
One of the fundamental things actually for me is, like, I advocate a lot for kind of neighborhood, place-based neighborhood working, incarnational living, like that kind of stuff. You know, I've lived 21 years in my own like wonderful community. It's a so-called disadvantaged community, like in East Birmingham, like an estate that's an outer estate. And yet, actually, if you adopt a kind of what I describe as a kind of treasure-seeking like approach to it, like let's discover the good and nurture it. Like let's discover what I would describe as the kingdom of God in our place. You know, and other people in the community wouldn't obviously use that language, but like, let's discover the good here. Let's discover the treasure here. Let's discover the possibilities here. And then let's think about what we can do together to make our place a place that's better for us all to kind of live in and for our kids to grow up in and for us to grow old in. And, you know, how can we do that? And so we've been community building here for a long time. And I think that's the thing for me. I can't sort out the whole problems of the whole world. I really like the Mother Teresa quote, you know, we're not all called to do great things, but we're all called to do small things with great love. I really love that quote, that actually, when we feel overwhelmed by the world, like we can be a good neighbor to our neighbor. You know, we can be a good dad to our kids. We can try and see someone, I don't know if you've got young people listening to this podcast, but do you know what I mean? Like I could be a young person in school who looks out for the kid who's always left out. There are things that we can do. So I think that for me is the kind of science hope. Jesus uses small language all the time. Faith is like a mustard seed, etc. He uses, we're going to leave the 99 and go and find the one. You know, Jesus uses small language all the time. Like, and I think these small acts of kindness, small acts of generosity, acts that bring people together. So I can't sort the whole world out, but I can campaign for it. I can advocate for it. Like I'm absolutely someone who would advocate for things like climate justice, redistribution of resources, human rights. I've just been on a bike ride this weekend with an organisation called Amos Trust, which is all about trying to kind of speak up for the rights of children who have been massacred in Gaza, you know, all of that kind of stuff. And I know those things are contentious, but, you know, I can speak up and be concerned about all of those things. But I can also kind of think about how can we make our neighbourhood together like a better place for living. And I think all of your listeners can do that. Like all of your listeners can go, right, what is it I can do tomorrow that makes where I live or the place I work or the school I'm in a bit better because I show up following Jesus. I follow up with care, compassion, love, generosity. And when people experience that from you, not because you're better than them, because often people have that innately themselves because they're all in the image of God. But I think then people begin to touch the possibility of Jesus for them, I think. And I think that for me is the kind of the signs of hope, do you know what I mean, if you like that I see everywhere around me. If we go looking for it, we'll see it. If you wake up every day and you say, I'm going to go and see for signs of the kingdom of God in everywhere that I go and everyone that I meet, you'll soon be surprised by what you encounter. You'll come back at the end of the day and thinking, I had that conversation with this person and I saw this and I got to do this. Like you'll soon begin to kind of see, I think, that God is at work in the world. And what's more hopeful than that?
Absolutely amazing answer. And I'm not trying to be negative here, but we get knockbacks by doing these things.
Yeah.
For those people that think, yes, but I don't want to be knocked back, or I have been knocked back by doing that, what would you say?
We follow someone who was crucified. And so knockbacks are part of it. That may sound like a flip answer, but it's not meant to be. It's meant to be a kind of, this is not meant to be easy. This is not meant to be easy stuff. Like when the world kind of defaults to scapegoating other people, making ourselves feel better, just looking after our own little world. Like when the world tells you that you're the most important thing, to then go, actually, loving God, loving others, loving my enemies, and loving myself is actually the core to living life well, which I think is the Christian kind of thing. Like, that's not easy, absolutely, and we have to have ways of being resilient. Like you beautifully shared, like about some of your own journey. We've got to be honest as well, like in that journey of going, what is it that I need? I mean, I'm very blessed to be married to an amazing woman. I've got some really good friends who I hang out with, and we talk about stuff, and we cry, and we wrestle with stuff. You have to have community, actually, like to do that. Like, I think you can't. This idea of the messianic superhero is absolutely not. You'll burn yourself out in 30 seconds flat with that. But if you can get on a journey with other people who want to make the world better, who want to make the world a better place, who want to show up well kind of in the world and invite others to show up well in the world. If you've got some friends, if you've got some mates, do you know what I mean? If you've got a community that can do that, which is what we might call the church, then I think you can find things within yourself to keep going and to keep kind of recognizing that, these things will happen to you, but you can continue through them. And I'll finish with this thought, actually. I was cycling with a vicar friend of mine the other day who was struggling just a little bit. And I said this as an aside to him, but he really latched onto it. I said, you just need to do what is yours to do. God is not asking any more of you than that. I can't tell you what that is, but do what is yours to do. If we all do that and help each other do that, that's the bit for us to do. We can't solve everything. We can't do everything. We're not meant to kill ourselves and burn ourselves out, like etc. But we've all got different capacities. But can we do what is ours to do? So I would say, my friends, like hearing your story, only having just met you, if looking after your wife and your son was yours to do, then that was yours to do. You didn't need to do more. That was yours to do. And that's all that God was asking of you. And so I think that that's a way to think about being in the world. To cope with all the other stuff is to do what is ours to do. And then at the end of our days, God will say, well done, good and faithful servant. Like, what more can you do? You can't lean away from it. You can lean into it, but you can also not feel, well, you've got to do everything. There's a thought for you. Do what is yours to do.
I'm going to keep this in because hopefully it will help those as well. But the last 24 hours has been beep for me.
Yeah.
And it's a recurring thing that happens to me every few weeks.
Okay.
And last night in particular was an awful time. You've also said something that the previous podcast guest that hasn't gone out yet. I don't know if you know a chap called Andy Chamberlain, but that podcast, by the time yours goes out, will have been released.
Yeah.
It's part of a trilogy, as it turns out, because Bob Prater, Andy Chamberlain, and also Dave Mann are all on the same thing. They've never met each other. They don't know each other, but they've all said the same thing in the space of a week. When I recorded it, it's all about community. You've put another thing on there.
Yeah.
Andy Chamberlain said we all need a little lady, an old little lady in church.
Yeah.
Because he went up to one of these ladies and she said, yes, but what is your to do? What is your do?
Yeah.
What is your do? And you've just said the same thing. What is your do?
Yeah. There we go. Tim.
There we go. That's for me as well, to learn that, yes, actually, God has called me to give up working for a Christian charity. Hey, guess what? I'm working for a Christian charity. Look at me. I'm speaking on the radio, all these things.
Yeah.
And God was saying, no, you need to look after your wife and your son.
Yeah.
And it was painful. It was horrible. It still is. Fighting the social justice so that we could get money to pay for stuff, having paid my national insurance all these years, trying to survive because we were in just a few months of going bankrupt and already having to face, I suppose pride comes into this, having to then go into housing benefit agencies and say, look, we've run out of money. We've sold our house. We've sold everything. We've run out.
Yeah.
That was probably one of the worst days of my life. And yet we're still here.
Yeah. Good.
Yeah. For those that are listening today, you've shared what you've gone through. I've shared what I've gone through. I didn't know we were going to be talking about that. But it's like, what can you offer? What your loaves and fish is? What can you offer?
Yeah.
You're doing it out in the community. And I think that's fantastic. And people need to say, well done, good and faithful servant. Keep going. Let's see things change, because people eventually will see Christ in action through you. Even if you are a Fulham supporter.
Yeah.
Even if Dave Mann is a West Ham fan. Even if I'm a Bristol City fan.
Yes.
Actually, this is a really good analogy to end on, if that's okay. If we relate it to football, instead of what nationality are you, what religion are you, Fulham, West Ham, Bristol City, we've got other guests who are fanatical about their team.
Yeah.
So what? Just go for it. You can't hate them. Even Man United fans, we can't hate them either.
Yeah. Yes, I think in football, isn't it? There's something about, there's rivalry.
Yes.
And then there's the sense of the football family. And if you look at when real serious stuff happens, often the football family will come, like Hillsborough is an obvious example. And I think that, like you say, that's a bit of a good analogy for this stuff. I think actually is, yes, of course, sometimes we might feel we're in rival camps or we're doing different things or whatever, but ultimately we're just God's family. And that's the whole human race, I think. Like we're all God's family. And if we thought of it like that and treated each other like that, and families have disagreements and things we don't see the same, etc. But if we thought ourselves as God's family, yeah, maybe things would be a bit better.
You've got something to go back and write now about being a pink lady.
Yeah.
On the football thing, actually, I think it's fair to say that if Jesus came back today, he'd be a Bristol Rovers fan.
Just to torture you.
Yeah. But also, I think God supports Bristol Rovers because they should have gone bankrupt so many times and they're still here.
Yeah.
There we go. Tim, it's been brilliant. Last question now. Thank you very much indeed for everything you've shared. There is so much to chew over on this. And throw out the bones that you don't like as well. Just listen to the bits that you do like and chew over those.
Yes, absolutely.
Tim Evans, who is your Christian hero, please?
Julian of Norwich, who was a mystic. She was locked up in this little kind of cell. She was very ill, and she uttered these incredible phrases that all is well and all manner of things like will be well, and she repeats it like a couple of times. I changed my mind actually partway through this conversation because of the conversation we were having. How can we draw inspiration from someone like that? Like her whole life is crushed physically, emotionally, literally the physical space that she's in, the plague all around her, like et cetera, all of those things that Julian of Norwich was experiencing. And yet her trust was that ultimately one day all things will be well. I just find that moving. It's the kind of thing that keeps me going, but it kind of resonates really deep with me. I think this kind of sense of what we were talking about. What is mine to do, but mine to do in the context that one day in God's world, like all things will be well and all manner of things will be well. I feel quite emotional talking about it actually. Like I changed my mind partway through this podcast because of what we were talking about. I think that sense of how do we find hope when the world seems hopeless?
Yeah.
How do we do that? Well, there's somebody who found hope when the world seemed hopeless. Maybe we can.
And what else do we know about her? Not him, definitely a her. What else do we know about Julian of Norwich?
So I'm afraid I don't know any more about her, but that inspiration of that kind of hope and this sense of, like you say, that one day all things will be well and all manner of things will be well. But we need to join in with that process of trying in our own little ways to live that out.
Tim Evans, thank you so much for joining us today. And I'm looking forward to the feedback from people. And if you want to write in and say, yes, but we'll write in. Let's hear what you have to say because that's part of being involved in the community. Tim, thanks for joining us today.
Thank you for having me.
And after our summer break, just like last year, I'll be taking a break throughout July and August, but returning on Friday, the 5th of September with an absolute belter. However, just like when I was growing up and we only had 3 TV channels, yes, 3, the summer holidays meant repeats after repeats after repeats. I too will be repeating all our previous special episodes. You might have already listened to one of them, but please listen again, as just like a film or TV show you have previously seen, there'll be so much you've forgotten and will enjoy the second time around. Just to whet your appetite, here is a sneak preview of Friday the 5th of September's release with Michael Porter, who is also Bishop Michael Porter of Bolton.
Well, once you don't do anything, I would say God loves you anyway. Just receive the love of God, but know he's with you, he's for you. Some folks, particularly if you've had really negative experiences, they need to be listened to and understood. Sometimes I find myself, when I speak to people like that, just apologising, saying, I'm really sorry that's been your experience. No one's often apologised to people, but listen to them. I think I'm encouraging them that God's there. How can I pray for you? And not in a patronising way saying that, but genuinely. Sometimes, if they let me pray with them, that would be a great honour. I'd love to pray that, God touches their heart again. They feel his presence. They know that he's with them. I'd encourage them to, if they stop reading the scriptures, to perhaps get back into the scriptures, just to, if they can, discover how amazing the person of Jesus is. Perhaps just get into the gospel stories and see his love for those who were often treated badly. I mean, look at Jesus himself. He was treated badly by religious people. So there's no better example than Jesus. So actually he's our model, or he's always our model. And I think I would in time say to them, look, don't rule out Christian community. There'll be something out there for you, whether it's in a house group or whether it's church meeting, a pub. It could be traditional church, actually. I mean, one advantage of a larger church is sometimes you can go and be a bit anonymous for a while. That's why people like going to cathedrals, I think, sometimes. You can hide behind a pillar or give me more traditional church. Before I came here, I was leading a very traditional service in Manchester Cathedral that some people might be surprised that someone like me who's used to leading more informal worship does. But as part of my role as a bishop, I quite enjoy that sometimes. And some people find a great joy in a more traditional liturgy that can be very rich, pre-prepared words that have been carefully formed over many years. That doesn't have to be mechanical. It can be very deep and meaningful. And maybe try different things. Sometimes people really engage with God through symbols. Often when I pray for healing for people, it says I anoint them with oil. That symbolic picture of the Holy Spirit. That's when they encounter the Lord. Where it says they take the bread and wine, that's a prize. It's as they take the Eucharist, they encounter God. So the symbols are really important. Sometimes in some evangelical churches, we've written those things off as somehow Catholic or something. It's not, it's just Christian. There's lots of different ways we can meet with God. So I just want to encourage people, let them know they're loved, they're important, and hopefully try to include people.
So please rejoin me again in September for the first of the new season of Off-Grid Christianity podcasts with special guest, the Bishop of Bolton, Matthew Porter. Until then, and have a nice summer. Cheerio.